Welcome to the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History's podcast series. This podcast features a program by me, Susan Young, the Museum Outreach Coordinator, as I discuss the history of movie theaters in Springdale, Arkansas, in a talk entitled Going to the Picture Show. The program was recorded November 20th, 2013.
Oh, I have had so much fun. I love doing research. You just can't ever stop. As late as yesterday, about 4 o'clock, I was running downstairs talking to our collections manager saying, guess what I just found out about the movie theaters? And then 10 minutes ago, Ellen Compton, where are you, Ellen, enlightened me with some new bit of information that I will share. I don't even know if I can make it through the program. I'm so stunned, but it will seem small, maybe seem small to you, but it's really a big thing. And then to have these folks who actually worked at the Apollo Theater, who I haven't even talked to, who I know way more than I do, and you can call me on anything that I don't get right. Who went to a Springdale movie theater ever in your life? And there's still a theater in town, see? So there's lots of experts in here. Gosh, this has been so much fun, and I need to get on with it because I have so much to tell you about. So let's get started. In 1906, August 1906, a moving picture show was among the programs offered at Springdale's annual Chautauqua, which is a kind of a literary circus. Programs come in from all over the world, really. Folks come in every summertime and present music and literary and educational, edifying topics. And we thought 1906 appeared to be the first time that moving pictures came to Springdale. Children packed this Chautauqua auditorium, which was located just a stone's throw east of us here. Children paid their hard-earned pennies, sat down in the front row as close as they could get to watch these moving pictures presented by the American Vitagraph Company. And then Professor Simpson walked on the stage and said, they're not coming. We don't know why. The American Vitagraph Company is just not showing up. But instead, kids, you're going to be treated to Dr. Green's uplifting and helpful lecture on left-handed men. They tried again next year. 1907, the Chautauqua organizers again booked the American Vitagraph Company to bring moving pictures to Springdale. This time, the American Vitagraph Company didn't show up because they said, gosh, it costs a lot to get to Springdale. We didn't figure that into our budget. It appears now that 1908 is the first time that we have on record that moving pictures came to Springdale, and that was with the Chautauqua, in this Chautauqua auditorium. But they changed vendors this time. They were smart about it and had the Height Monroe Moving Picture Company bring in their machinery, and we don't know what they showed. This was in the era of silent films, when films were described by the reel. One reeler was usually 10 minutes long. So we don't know what they showed, but they came in and did keep up their part of the bargain. So about 1908 is the first time we have motion pictures in Springdale. Then enter three fellas, actually. This fella, Glenn Martin, his brother here, Clyde Martin, who along with being members of the Springdale Band were also the owners and operators of Springdale's first electric company. They partnered with a man named Frank Coring to form the Northwest Arkansas Amusement Company and announced that they would start showing regular motion picture features in that Chautauqua auditorium. Now that Frank Coring, I'd never heard of him before, and lo and behold, we have a picture of him in our museum collection. And when I show you, of course he wanted to be in the pictures. Look at him. That's him. Now, on the 1910 census, it lists him as a metal worker, but he's a wannabe Tom Mix or silent film star. So these three men started the first amusement company with the idea of holding regular motion pictures in Springdale. This is the era of silent films, but films are anything but silent. There's that ticking of the projector. People were interacting. You didn't just sit there and be quiet. If there was a villain on the screen, you booed and hissed. Maybe sometimes the Springdale band or part of the orchestra would come and play music and accompany it. You had live music to go with the moving pictures. So really silent films is a misnomer. Then in March of 1910, two more fellas. This fella, John P. Stafford, well known in Springdale history, the longtime editor of the Springdale News, and his friend Charles Renner. Not only were they baseball players and managers, they leased a building on Emma Avenue, the first time a building was leased on Emma Avenue with the idea of showing moving pictures. And they named it The Princess. Here's as good as I can do, and I was pretty impressed by this, to show you a picture of the princess. Oh, I forgot. That's not the princess. That's the manager. That's the manager of the princess. His name was Roy Hewitt, and he's a young fellow there, but it wasn't long after this picture was made that he got in the motion picture business of running the theater for John P. Stafford and Charles Renner, and then he decided to run for mayor and got out of the theater business, but he was involved in it for several years. Now let's look at the princess that he managed. So there's Emma Avenue. Can you see that right there? That says Princess. That is roughly the corner of Emma and Main, the northeast corner of Emma and Main. So in that little bricks building, which was not built for a theater, it was a store building that they retrofitted to show motion pictures. That was Springdale's first movie house that was dedicated just for that purpose. And that opened in 1910. They described it in the Springdale News. They said, elevated seats have been installed, and when the weather gets warmer, electric fans will be placed in the building so that at all times, it will be a comfortable place for rest and recreation. They also had an Ellington piano and Edison phonograph and records. Movies were shown 3 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday evenings. They showed 3 reels on every evening. So about 30 minutes. A reel is 10 minutes. And they never repeated them. You show those 3 movies, and then you go on to something else. And unless the public requested that you show a repeat performance. Admission was 10 cents for adults and 5 cents for kids 5 to 11 years old. And the Princess had a great slogan, Princess Pictures, please particular people. Opened for business in March of 1910 with the first 3 reels shown were these are mysterious sounding, the Cardboard Babies, that was described as pictures that will appeal especially to children. Sensational Logging, a true and vivid description of the great logging industry from felling the timber in the woods to its transportation by water and rail to the mills. Don't fail to see the great scene of blowing up the logs with dynamite to break a jam. And then the third show was reviewing U.S. troops at Fort Leavenworth. So the Springdale retail merchants, downtown merchants in Springdale, kicked in and offered free movies on Saturday for the country people. People that came in from the country to do their shopping on Saturday could stop at any of the participating Springdale merchants and get a free ticket to the movie theater, which must have been a great treat. The movies were supplied by Film Exchanges, which is the same thing that it's done today. It's just a distributor that you go through to get your films. And now John P. Stafford, remember I said he was the editor of the Springdale News, and he and Charles Renner, as I can figure, owned the building, but they weren't really involved in the running of the theater itself, because it wasn't. And about a year later, in March 1911. The Springdale News grumbled that the management of the Princess has recently changed Film Exchanges, and these films are just very ordinary. And it wasn't long until they upgraded their offerings. The Princess soon advertised the 2-reeler, so now we've gone to 20 minutes, The Fall of Troy. The Springdale News described The Fall of Troy as a film which causes any other subject heretofore produced by any manufacturer in the world to pale in significance. They followed that up with Grenadier Roland, which was a story of Napoleon, about the fall of Napoleon, and the News said about that film, it's considered by all authorities upon the subject as the most magnificent and spectacular military drama in the world. It cost $25,000 to produce. In 1912, they built a stage in the Princess so that they could expand to offer live vaudeville activities. And in fact, on Thanksgiving afternoon in November of 1912, they had a 3 p.m. matinee showing moving pictures, followed by a live high-class vaudeville act. And then in 1913, what I'm doing is just giving you some little high points of the theaters as I could find them. There was a long article in the morning news extolling the virtues of going to the movie theater, and the Princess was the only game in town, unless they were showing some occasional films at the Chautauqua Auditorium. They said, "The Princess caters especially to ladies and children. Mothers with children can come in at any time or can send the young ones alone and can rest assured that nothing will be seen or done that could offend the most particular." So it was a safe place to go. And after that, the Princess just kind of disappears from mention in the Springdale News. Then we move on to the mystery of the Majestic Theater. And can you see that? Majestic. That's the south side of Emma Avenue. So that the Princess was up in here. I can't tell you for certain that was the Majestic Theater. There are very few mentions of the theater in the morning news. The first mention I could find was in May 1913 when it said that a man named A.T. Smith has purchased the brick business house on Emma Avenue, now occupied by the Majestic Theater. Well, that's a brick business house. That word has been painted out, whited out. So maybe that was the Majestic Theater. I kind of think that what happened was Roy Hewitt, that guy that I mistakenly called the Princess, who was sitting in the back row, later ran for mayor, he was listed as the owner of the Princess Theater. And then it said he has sold the Majestic Theater to a man named John Sutherland. And Mr. Sutherland would take up the Majestic. I kind of think the Majestic maybe moved over to where the Shiloh or the Princess Theater was. And by the way, John Sutherland, who bought the Majestic, his occupation before that was a dealer of sanitary nest eggs. Now, how you go from that to running a movie theater, I don't know. But the Majestic, a few mentions. They were a civic-minded place. They held a fundraiser for the Cemetery Association in the summer of 1913 and raised $30.05 toward the upkeep of the town cemetery. They sponsored a popularity contest that summer. Each paid admission gave you one vote to vote for the most popular lady in town, and she was to receive a handsome watch as her prize. That theater also showed the Perils of Pauline, which is that damsel in distress serial starring Missouri-born actor Pearl White. Then we come. Let me go back to the Majestic. Think about the Majestic a minute. Probably the biggest thing to happen at the Majestic was the showing of The Shepherd of the Hills in 1919. Probably most of y'all have heard of that novel by Harold Bell Wright. It's set in the Ozarks, a story of redemption and kind of mystery in the Ozarks, life in the Ozarks. Harold Bell Wright oversaw the production of this silent film in 1919, and it was a 10-reel feature. So it was a long movie. It played in only 3 towns in northwest Arkansas: Springdale at the Majestic, and Rogers and Eureka Springs. Admission was steep. It was 50 cents for adults and 25 cents for children. That was the same admission that was charged anywhere in the country. The big cities, Harold Bell Wright he produced the film, he set the admission fee. It was the same for everybody. And the Springdale News said, you better come early and get in line because carloads of people are coming from Fayetteville to see this movie. The Gym Theater. The Gym opened August 5th, 1919, and it opened with a newspaper ad that boasted, think about the nice, cool air circulating through the building all the time. No sweaty, hot feelings. And those nice, easy opera chairs make you just as comfortable as that old rocking chair at home. The Majestic was still in operation at this time. I can find ads for both in the newspaper. So this may be the first time Springdale ever had 2 movie theaters. I think it probably was. The Gym started offering Saturday matinees soon after it opened. Admission was 15 cents for adults, 10 cents for kids. By 1921, the price had risen to 20 cents for adults, and in 2 years later, in 1922, it was 25 cents. It billed itself, that little kind of hole in the wall, billed itself as home of refined and worthwhile photoplays. And boy, one of the most famous at the time did play at the gym. The Sheik. Played there on April 12th, 1922. Now, that was only 6 months after the film had been released nationwide, so it only took 6 months to get here. That's not bad. This is the film that made Rudolph Valentino his career as a Latin lover. Have y'all ever watched this? It's kind of creepy. It really is. But it was so popular. Admission was 40 cents for adults and 20 cents for kids, although I would not have taken my child to see it. It was so popular that they brought it back a week later on April 26th and said 25 cents will get the whole family in. Bring everybody, 25 cents. We want everybody, the gym management said, we want everybody that wants to see this to be able to see it. So 25 cents admission. By December 1926, the manager of the gym theater was a man named Ray Morrow. He figured prominently in Springdale movie history. He was manager of the gym, and he was also, in 1926, building a new theater. It would be the first building built in Springdale specifically for the purpose of being a movie theater, not a retrofitted store building, not an old warehouse, not a Chautauqua auditorium, but a movie theater. And there's the best picture I have of it. Now, you see the name of it. The name is the Concord. It was designed by noted architect from Rogers, A.O. Clark, who also designed the Victory Theater in Rogers. And look at the two together. You see the similarities in the design. Now, it was an unnamed theater. These theater owners and managers were great showmen in their own right, and Ray Morrow was no exception. He figured out a name for his theater pretty early on in the process, but he didn't tell anybody. Instead, he held a contest saying, guess what I'm going to name the theater? I'll pay $7.50 to the winner if anybody can guess the name of my theater. He said it's an appropriate name, it's unique, it's appropriate to Springdale, but as far as I know, there's no other theater in the nation with this name. He chose the Concord. 1926 is the glory times of the grape industry in northwest Arkansas. We have the Italians in Taneytown that have led the way in grape growing and harvesting. We have Welch's that put a processing plant here in 1923. So there was this love affair with the Concord grape. That theater seated 650 people. There was seating for 200 in the balcony. The chairs were walnut-finished folding chairs that were bolted to the floor. That was a big advancement. All the wiring was in conduit, no exposed wiring. They continually took out articles in the paper assuring folks that the balcony would be safe and that the building was practically fireproof. It was made of plaster walls, concrete floors, and the plaster walls were supported by a metal frame, so practically fireproof, which was a great concern in these movie theaters. The projection room was fireproof. It had a typhoon cooling system and a steam heating system for year-round comfort, a 5-stop pipe organ, and a stage with footlights. They pointed out that there was a ladies' restroom, sanitary drinking fountain, all this at an estimated cost of $35,000. And that sign that said Concord had about 350 little glowing lights that could be seen from afar, it said. And in keeping with the name, the sign was there were grapevines that were kind of furled around the edge of it. So it opened in 1927 with the showing of The Magic Garden. Admission was 10 and 15 cents. The ceiling lights and stage lights had yet to be installed, but they opened anyway, with a prayer by the local Methodist preacher, a speech by Mr. Morrow, and the Southern Pipe Organ even sent up a real high-class organist from Dallas, Texas, named Lawrence Bolton, to play during the opening feature. Well, about a year later, Ray Morrow and his wife leave Springdale. They go on to manage theaters in a chain of theaters in southwest Missouri and northwest Arkansas, and the management of the Concord was turned over to a company, I guess, Fitton and Garvin, who were based in Harrison and ran a chain of theaters in Harrison, Searcy, Malvern, and Aurora, Missouri. So it was Fitton and Garvin that brought the first talking picture to Springdale in 1929. It was The Carnation Kid, which was a movie about a typewriter salesman who's mistaken for a Chicago hitman. So they put in the sound equipment, show this picture in May 1929, and less than 3 months later, they abruptly announced, we're closing. Business is bad. And it later accounts, while the movies were being shown with sound, the newspaper said, oh, the sound is great. This is wonderful. But then after the theater started going downhill, it was, the sound is not so good. So Ray Morrow and his wife come back to Springdale, rescue the Concord, say, we'll take it back over. We don't want to see the Concord close. But Ray Morrow said, I'm going to go back to showing silent films until a town this size of Springdale can support good sound equipment. We're not going to bring sound pictures in until y'all can help us pay for it. And which he did soon in May of it was January of 1930. So in less than a year or so, they advertised RCA. They put in some RCA sound equipment and advertised the screening of this musical comedy called Street Girl, which was the fictional misadventures of Frederica Joyzel, who was a Hungarian violinist in the play. Morrow reworked the acoustics of the Concord, and he said in a letter, an advertisement printed in the Morning News that was signed by Mr. Morrow and his wife, they stated that the changes and new equipment have been mighty costly, but we intend to give the best entertainment possible. The entertainment value of the new talking and musical pictures will be a revelation to those who have not had the pleasure of hearing and seeing them. We ask for your support and loyalty. The distributors demanded admission of 25 and 50 cents, but let us say that it's worth it. So in a little over a year, then Ray Morrow announces that he has leased the Concord Theater to the Mid-States Theater Company of Kansas City, Missouri. So the Concord looks like it's fated for becoming a one in a chain of regional movie theaters, that they would take over management of the Concord. Mid-States had some 40 or 50 theaters in the Midwest, so didn't really look so good as far as keeping that individual community feeling of a movie theater. But then perhaps the hero of this program steps in, and I am so sorry, this is the only picture I have of him. William F. Sonneman stepped in. He was at that time owner of the Ozark and Palace Theaters in Fayetteville, and he bought the Concord from Mid-States Theater Company in Kansas City and added it to his stable of movie theaters. He had been in the movie theater business since 1909. He had been in the Northwest Arkansas movie theater business since 1925 when he and his family moved to Fayetteville from Waco, Texas. Sonneman, oh my goodness, what a guy. He was a skilled promoter, a savvy businessman, a generous community leader, incredibly opinionated and outspoken, and used his advertisements many times as his bully pulpit. He took out weekly ads in the paper to tell about the movies that were coming, and then he started sticking a little letter in there, and he'd start out talking about the movies and end up railing about taxes. For instance, right after he bought the Concord, this ad soon appears in the Springdale News. Now look at this. Does Springdale really want and appreciate this class of entertainment? Here's a cold fact. We cannot continue the high-class, new fine shows of our first 2 months on the patronage so far received from the Springdale people. He is scolding folks for not coming to his movie theater. Now, I love this next scene, and I don't mean anything disparaging about Springdale, but to me it is just an evocative photo of the milieu of Springdale in the 1930s when Sonneman buys the Concord. Look at this. It's parked outside the Concord Theater. But, Springdale's a farming community. There are well-to-do folks here, but not everybody has the disposable income to go to a movie regularly. But still, Sonneman keeps railing at people. He took out another ad in December of 31, and this is what he said. We are showing the very best picture product, specially selected, some before, some immediately after Fayetteville, so he's pitting Fayetteville against Springdale. Look, some of these movies I'm bringing to y'all are coming here before they're coming to Fayetteville. All the movies I bring are showing at the same time in St. Louis and other metropolitan areas. Now, then he puts the hammer down. Last week and the week before, we showed 3 special selected pictures each week, 3 ahead of Fayetteville. Yet the patronage in Springdale was pitiful. This is in print in the Springdale News. The theater showing an operation loss of over $100 each week. Very few of you Springdale businessmen have been in the theater lately. Is it possible that you do not care for an up-to-date theater in your city? Certainly, we cannot continue to give the class of shows now continually here or even keep the Concord open unless you people want and support the same. This much is sure, it's up to Springdale. He must have caught some flack for that because within a week he had issued this ad in the Springdale News. It has come to our attention that some thought us rather hard-boiled in our previous ads. To those of you that are interested in keeping the Class A theater in your town and have shown the same by your attendance, we want to express our appreciation. And we hope for your sake that some of your bridge-playing friends, and bridge was in capital letters, we hope some of your bridge-playing friends will wake up to the necessity of their presence at least occasionally. So there's his apology. That's all you're getting. And I say he often used his movie ads, his movie letters, as a bully pulpit. Consider this commentary he wrote in a 1934 movie ad that ran in a Fayetteville newspaper. I don't think it was the Democrat. I'm not sure. It might have been. But we only have a clipping in one of our scrapbooks here in the museum that I ran across. But here is this clipping. It is dated 1934 that Sonneman has written this commentary. We admit our movies are wrong in spots, and the industry is trying to correct this. We hope the church industry is also trying to correct their wrongs, as they have plenty of them. But you do not see the moving picture industry or any other trying to boycott the churches on account of these wrongs. Our opinion is that it's time the church wake up to tending their own beam and stop pulling splinters. Sonneman had a regular show on radio station KUOA. It was live organ music. Organ music also often played by his daughter-in-law, Gladys Sonneman, who was very well known in the theater days when they had organs to be played, pipe organs. But he had this show on KUOA, which started out as a radio station owned by the Fulbright family in Fayetteville. And with this live organ music, then Sonneman would come in and give you updates on what movies were coming. Well, then the Fulbrights sold their KUOA station to this fellow, John Brown, Siloam Springs evangelist, founder of John Brown University, now University. And so when Brown took over KUOA, he informed Sonneman that your radio spots are going to be discontinued. As Sonneman recalled, Brown said that we will only run ads in keeping with the highest Christian principles. So movie-going, in John Brown's mind, was not of the highest Christian principle. Well, so after getting the boot from John Brown, Sonneman tuned into KUOA one day and could not believe his ears. And he promptly wrote about it in his next weekly movie column. Here's what he said. I heard an advertisement on KUOA for the Coney Island Carnival appearing in Rogers during the 4th of July. He reminded readers to, quote, consider what carnivals have always been and probably always will be. And he pointed out that Little Rock authorities had recently busted up a, quote, vulgar carnival. Then he lowered the boom. Can you believe in a man who will kick out the Methodist Church program of organ music and then advertise a traveling street carnival? Use your head and the brain God gave you and intelligently analyze what's going on, and remember that KUOA is now advertising a common, very common, street carnival, and that's that. He often ended his columns, his letters with, that's that. He railed about the new statewide 2% sales tax in July 1935. He said, the sales tax is here and the law says we must collect it. Cuss your legislature if you don't like it. Then he weighed in on the Springdale city auto tax, saying, why are we asked to pay a city auto tax for the upkeep of our streets on which we have failed to see any upkeep? You even have to pay for your own street sweeping. This is in the movie advertisements that he's doing this. He even took on movie star Jean Harlow. This is incredible. In 1935, some Pi Beta Phi sorority sisters at the University of Arkansas went to see a Jean Harlow picture, I believe it was called Reckless, at one of William Sonneman's Fayetteville movie theaters. Don't know which theater, but the co-eds, the Pi Phis, went to see Jean Harlow in this movie. They loved it. The movie was panned by critics. It was a bomb. But these co-eds loved it, and they said, let's call Jean Harlow and give her a little boost and tell her that we love this movie. They did. They pooled their money, called MGM, and MGM gave them Jean Harlow's home phone number. But they had to call through the operator, maybe person to person. Maybe that was just how telephones were back in 35. The girls were devastated when the operator came on the line to tell them that Miss Harlow, quote, didn't know anybody in Arkansas and didn't want to talk to anybody in Arkansas. Well, the next day, the Pi Phis got together. They went to see Mr. Sonneman. They told him what a snoot that Jean Harlow had been to them and said, if you don't do something about this, we are going to boycott all your theaters that ever show a Jean Harlow picture. We're going to tell everybody we know to boycott Jean Harlow pictures. And the Pi Phis, the Pi Beta Phi sorority, very influential families across the nation. So Sonneman looked at these girls and thought, these co-eds have got some clout. And they were cash-paying customers. So he got busy. He got on the phone and called the Independent Theater Owners of Arkansas's home in Little Rock, and they just happened to be having their state convention. Funny how things work out. They were having their state convention. I don't know why Sonneman wasn't there, but he called them in Little Rock, explained what was going on, and the theater owners promptly and unanimously adopted a resolution against Jean Harlow for her rudeness to her fans and admirers, the people that put her where she was today. Well, they forwarded that resolution to MGM. The Associated Press picked it up. And MGM management, from what little I read about Jean Harlow, she must have been kind of a pill. Kind of hard to deal with. But MGM management was furious. They sent someone to the set where she was working on a film and said, what in heaven's name have you done? Her reported comment was, this is preposterous. Rude to a fan? Never. This is all a misunderstanding. I'll call the girls. The manager said, yes, you will call those girls, and you will apologize to them if that is what they want you to do. So she called them. She talked to the president of the Pi Beta Phi sorority, a young woman named Roberta Henderson, and then Jean Harlow reversed the charges. The Pi Beta Phi sorority paid $6.25 to hear Jean Harlow say that she was sorry. But it all started with William Sonneman. He was hard-boiled, he was opinionated, he was outspoken, but he was also generous in offering his Concord theaters, all his theaters, to help with school benefits, hospital benefits, fundraising for the fire department, March of Dimes. When the kids were good on Halloween, he gave them free movies the next weekend. He helped start a local Mickey Mouse Club here in Springdale. Didn't cost anything, and each Saturday the kids could go see a movie. He supported patriotic events. But he was a showman. He was such a showman. He staged with this movie there in the middle, Sky Bride, that showed at the Concord in 1932. Sonneman staged a midnight marriage at the Concord in connection with the movie. The bride and groom were Arvilla Williams and Marvin Jaggers, who lived near Lowell. The minister from the First Baptist Church performed the ceremony. Mitchell's Razorback Orchestra played before the wedding, and Sonneman's daughter-in-law Gladys Sonneman played the wedding march on the theater organ. Springdale merchants pitched in, donated gifts for the newlyweds, which included a wedding ring from Ken & Jewelry, hairstyling from Delana's Beauty Shop, a wedding cake from Springdale Bakery, a pressure cooker from Famous Hardware, a box of meat from the Springdale Meat Market, a clothes hamper from Wilson's Mercantile, and 2 months of movie passes from the Concord. In 1937, Sonneman was involved with what was believed to be the filming of the first all-talking movie in Springdale. It was a takeoff of the R Gang, Spanky, and Alfalfa. It was a takeoff that starred Little Don Tyson. In the movie, it was a comedy. Little Don Tyson organizes a group of local kids to help adults find a kidnapped girl. Scenes were filmed at the Roy Joyce home on Holcomb Street, the Legion Hut, and then dance and musical numbers were filmed. They took all the kids and the film crew up to the Harris Hotel in Rogers and filmed there because the acoustics were so wonderful. I don't guess that film survives. I sure wish it did. In 1938, this movie showed at the Concord in Old Chicago. It was about the infamous Chicago fire. They put a fake fire blazed on top of the Concord Theater. The public thought it was real. The fire department was in on it. They raced to the scene, put out the fire, and used it as part of their weekly training practice runs. In September of 1940, Sonneman announced that he was remodeling the Economy Food Market building on Emma Avenue to be a small, modern, air-conditioned movie theater named the Shiloh. He purposely left the H off. The Shiloh was to play first-run action and westerns and second-run major films. That way, he could offer lower ticket prices at the Shiloh. So it was something for everybody. You could go to the Concord and see first-run blockbuster movies, or you could go to the Shiloh and see the B movies, or maybe some of the top movies that had been around a little while. It opened November 22nd, 1940, with the movie Laddie, which was a love story set in colonial New England. A unique thing about the Shiloh that I've been told is you walked into the theater, you walked in through the lobby, and then you walked back and then sat down facing the front of the theater. The screen was at the front, so while you're watching the movie, you could see people walking up and down Emma Avenue. Well, you remember Sonneman staged that fake fire when the Chicago Fire movie was playing well. It really did catch on fire in May of 1943. Fred Bookout, the local blacksmith who had a blacksmith shop behind the Concord, discovered smoke coming from the theater when he came to work one morning in May of 1943. Took 16 Springdale firemen and 4 Fayetteville firemen, along with local bystanders, pitching in, and they fought the fire for more than 3 hours. Concord employees Luther Carter and A.T. Huff rescued the projection equipment by hauling it out through a front window, which those windows are busted out, maybe those. Sonneman's son, Emil Sonneman, climbed on the theater roof and busted a hole in the roof with a crowbar so firemen who were they got on either side of the building to keep the fire from spreading. He busted a hole in the Concord roof so that they could get in and into the theater itself and pour the fire hoses, and the firemen said that water was just cascading like a waterfall off the balcony. There's a lot of damage, but they started cleanup the day of the fire, and reopened 3 weeks later. Sonneman was very patriotic, as I said, very involved in the war effort. In November of 1944, he donated the use of the Concord to the war effort, and there was a film of frontline fighting that was as documented by Army and Navy photographers. And the Springdale News warned that these pictures are far too gruesome for showings to regular audiences. Youngsters under 16 will not be admitted. 2 wounded soldiers accompanied the theaters. Accompanied the movies. There was an amphibious Jeep on display on Emma Avenue. And then after the movie, there were people from the recruiters from war production plants that would talk to folks about ways they could get jobs helping with the war effort. Help win the war quicker, they said. Well, in June of 1948, Sonneman turned over his Fayetteville theaters, the UARC, the Ozark, the Palace, and the Royal, to Malco Theaters of Little Rock. He said he would continue to operate his theaters in Springdale, though, which is a wonderful thing. And he announced that he was going to build a new, as yet unnamed theater. Now, this is the earliest picture we have of it, so you'll see the name of it. The Apollo. But when work started in March of 1949, the theater was not named. It was built on top of a drainage ditch. You can drive by it today. And why anybody would do that? But they did it, and the Springdale City Council said, we will pay to have that ditch reinforced and concreted, and we'll make sure it never floods. How many of y'all lived in Springdale when the street flooded? Well, Soon after the construction of that theater was underway, Sonneman's manager, Max Cox, a man named Max Cox, announced that they were going to hold a contest to name the theater. Now, in this case, it was, you all name the theater. Submit your entries. What do you want this theater to be called? Well, you can see that the name chosen was the Apollo, but not because of the naming contest. They announce it in the newspaper, and then you never see any follow-up. Well, and I've heard variations of this story, but the core of the story is the same. In 1948, Springdale antiques dealer Dallas Barak, and a lot of y'all remember Mr. Barak, had an impressive statue, marble statue of the Greek god Apollo for sale in his gallery, which was down here on Mill Street, right? I'm looking at all this clutch of Springdale old-timers. So he had this statue of Apollo. Okay, it wasn't some chintzy yard art. It was a magnificent piece of sculpture. One story said that Sonneman's manager, Max Cox, happened to see this sculpture in Barak's gallery and said, Mr. Sonneman, you ought to go take a look at that statue. And that Sonneman went down there and was so taken with it that he bought it and named his theater after the statue. And put it in the lobby of the theater. That's one version. Another version is that Mr. Barak himself submitted the name Apollo because he had this statue that he wanted to sell. And either way, Mr. Barak's the winner of the contest, right? Because he sells the statue. I have yet to find a photograph of the Apollo statue in situ when it was in the lobby of the Apollo Theater. The theater opened September 29th, 1949 with this show, It's a Great Feeling, a Doris Day spoof about what goes on behind the scenes in Hollywood movie making. It's pretty appropriate. The theater was Sonneman's attempt at being a movie palace. And that's what, in the big cities, what movie theaters were. They were palaces. They were escapes. This was Sonneman's flagship of his movie theaters. It boasted staggered stadium seating. And by stadium seating, the floor was sloped. Staggered meant that you weren't looking right at somebody's back of their head. He said, we have form-fitting, well-cushioned, extra-wide seats. It's carpeted. We have glassed-in party rooms for private viewing. I later see those described as rooms where mamas take the babies that are crying. But to start out, they were party rooms for private viewing. A $20,000 pipe organ that was played by his daughter-in-law, Gladys Sonneman, and art and antiques that decorated the lobby from Barak's antique gallery. It was as close to a big city movie palace as anything Northwest Arkansas had ever seen. And the Springdale News, 2 pages of congratulatory ads from Cary Grant and Robert Young congratulating Mr. Sonneman. I mean, if he can get Jean Harlow back on track, he can get thank yous from Cary Grant. And thank yous from local merchants such as Barak's, the one who for replacing the old mud hole with the beautiful new show. And from the plumbers, Sturdivant's. When finer theaters are built, W.F. Sonneman will build them. And when those finer theaters are plumbed, Sturdivant will plumb them. Isn't that great? And so the Apollo enjoys great popularity in the 50s. And in 1960, a fella, Springdale resident Dale Gilmore, received a patent for a continuous method of making popcorn balls. He created an invention he created for Mr. Sonneman. Popcorn balls were a signature treat offered at the Apollo, and it's I don't know about other Sonneman movie theaters, but certainly at the Apollo, as was pickle juice served over ice. So there's your clues about the treats that y'all are sitting and waiting for. If I see y'all leave, it's going to hurt my feelings. So a machine to make popcorn balls. So we have the Concord is still in business at this time, that we have the Apollo and the Concord downtown. But then in 1963, Springdale's first drive-in movie opens, The Grove. This is in a series of negatives that have to do with the grand opening, but that's not the films that were shown. The grand opening films were 2 Andy Griffith movies, No Time for Sergeants and The Second Time Around. Admission was 70 cents with free admission for kids who came with their parents. And you can see it was well received opening day. There was a patio concert at the concession stand by a band called the Gents. Does anybody know who the Gents were? Any of y'all? North of Springdale. What would be a landmark now? Kind of that intersection of Seaside Pools. Thank you, Truman. But north going toward Lowell would be on the west side of the highway. The screen was there until just a few years ago, but it's not there anymore, is it? Let's see. So the big advertising, the marketing behind the Grove Drive-In was, is this a place you can bring the whole family? Pile them in the car. You don't even have to get out of the car. Bring the babies, bring the kids. Turn the kids out in the kiddie corral down here to play, the playground. If the babies are too little to go to the kiddie corral, what if the baby needs a bottle? We'll take care of it. They had a baby bottle warming service. And when I looked in the newspaper ad, that kind of helped explain a series of very strange negatives that are in the Springdale News collection that have to do with adults and drinking out of baby bottles. And I thought, what is going on here? So here's one. Look, they're pairs of people holding, and at least one of them's holding a baby bottle. So that has something to do with the baby bottle warming service that was hyped at the grand opening. It's not mentioned in the newspaper really, other than to say they had this baby bottle warming service. Back on Emma Avenue, the Concord finally closed its doors. I can find the ads in the spring of 1963, so sometime after the spring of 1963, the Concord closes. That building is used for a time by the Springdale Fine Arts Association, which was the forerunner of the Art Center of the Ozarks. The Apollo maintains its popularity throughout the 1960s. William Sonneman died in 1969 at the age of 92. He had retired from the movie business at that point. He died in a car wreck. He was still driving at age 92. Passed away as a result of injuries in a car wreck. And once he retired from the movie business, the Apollo, in my mind, was never the same. Now I'm going to warn y'all, I'm going to just briefly delve into a seedy side of the Apollo's history, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but just relaying the story. In 1971, ads start showing up for X-rated movies at the Apollo Theater. These ads ran in the Northwest Arkansas Times and the Fayetteville alternative paper The Grapevine, but rarely, almost never, did those ads run in the Springdale News. Here is one of the few ads that I did see in the Springdale News. It's kind of hard to see, but you see that censored? That's the name of the movie. Do you know what word is censored there? Adultery. The name of the movie was Adultery for Fun and Profit. One of the few ads that ran in the Springdale News. Now, it's in talking with Jim Morris, who was the longtime editor of the news, I asked him, did y'all have a policy that you would not support these type of ads? And he said, well, it was not a written in-place policy, but he said knowing the Sanders family that owned the newspaper, they would have put the hammer down on that. There would have been no X-rated movie ads in the Springdale News, and there were very few. The decision by the operators of the Apollo to run X-rated movies was met with opposition from a number of Springdale citizens. Apollo management made a gesture toward appeasing this public outcry. Now, this is a photograph that was taken by a Springdale News photographer, but it wasn't taken to ever run in the newspaper. The envelope that the photographer put his negative in said, "For Police Department." So he's helping them. A group of citizens go to the city council and say, do something about this. The city council wisely and correctly says, this won't hold up in court. We have to establish that it violates obscenity laws and all this, and there's nothing we can do at this point. But they did try to clean up the Apollo's Act, and so there's an ad in November of 1971 that the Apollo ran in the Springdale News that says this: effective mid-December, we'll start showing family movies, but y'all better patronize these in the same way you're patronizing our adult films. And sure enough, they kept their word. By mid-December, this movie was showing. Smoke in the Wind, y'all remember that? It was filmed right here in northwest Arkansas. It was starring Walter Brennan. It was filmed in Winslow. You can still go in downtown Winslow and see some remnants of the storefronts that they built as a kind of looked like kind of a Western scene. That's a G-rated movie. That was one of the, I think it showed in Springdale first before it showed any place else. So there, the Apollo management is trying to follow their word, and they really do an about-face later on in December with these two films. So they've gone far and away from adultery to showing religious and Christmas movies. But that didn't last. The X-rated problem didn't go away. In January of 1972, the Springdale City Council went on record opposing the showing of X-rated films in Springdale. Only one councilman voted against that, and he said he didn't think the council could take action against a legally run business, whether they agreed with the business practices or not. He was quoted in the paper, that the lone councilman who voted against it, as saying, "If my kids ever see an X-rated movie, I'd rather they see it in a theater in downtown Springdale than in a drive-in." He was probably referring to the Tri-City, an X-rated drive-in just east of Springdale on today's Highway 412 out towards Sonora. This is the first ad, and I never saw an ad for the Tri-City in the Springdale News. This is an ad from the Northwest Arkansas Times of the first film that ran at the Tri-City. And here's how they billed themselves. The Tri-City opened in November of 71, billing itself as the world's most unique space-age drive-in theater. It's the world's first drive-in with individual screens for each car and radio sound. Your speaker is your own car radio. Dial 660 on your dial. In September of 1972, 8 months after the Springdale City Council went on record as condemning X-rated movies in Springdale, something incredible happened. The Apollo Theater was likely the first movie theater in the state of Arkansas. I'm standing on the shoulders of Tim Nutt, he's a head of special collections at the University of Arkansas, and he's done extensive research on censorship and censor boards in Arkansas, and he came across this tidbit. The Apollo was likely the first theater in Arkansas to show the infamous porn film Deep Throat. Unbelievable. And why? No dress code? It didn't show for very long. It was only here for a few days. It took 3 years, but finally in July of 1975, the Apollo was shut down. The owner and projectionist charged with showing an obscene film entitled Touch Me. And you see these are two Springdale detectives, Gary Payne and Floyd Hancock, with the confiscated film. The manager and projectionist both pled guilty. They were fined, and Judge Maupin Cummings ordered the Apollo to begin showing family movies or close for good. And that was pretty much the end of the Apollo as a movie theater, and the end of movie theaters in downtown Springdale. Over the years since the Apollo closed, there are several attempts to make it into a music theater. That's one of the saddest pictures. They're covering up that Apollo sign right there. As a music theater for a while, offering clean family entertainment. Then in 1991, there was another couple that tried to resurrect it yet again into a music theater, and the Northwest Arkansas Times ran a story about it, and we have these photo negatives, which are incredible, of the inside. The owners of the theater at that time thought this color was original. Is that what the Apollo was painted inside? Y'all remember that? I hope not. But you see, that fountain is still, that's not a little concrete bird bath. That's a piece of sculpture that is left over from, I'm sure, the heyday of Mr. Sonneman's decoration. And then there's this, look at this incredible piece. That's a fine piece, a fine mirror that was still there inside the Apollo in 1991. And this sad picture, there's still, in 1991, the camera, the projectors were still there. The projection equipment was just sitting in the projection booth, rusting away. In 1978, we get a Malco Theater, the Springdale Twin. There's the interior of one side of the Springdale Twin, which is located out on 412 West. It had 294 seats on each side. The first movies shown there were One-on-One, which is one of my favorite movies, a story about a college basketball star starring Robbie Benson, and Young Frankenstein. Everybody knows that one, a classic Mel Brooks comedy. Here's the concession stand, which looked a lot like concession stands that I remember. And there's the projection room and Johnny Johnson, who was the manager. Now, the biggest thing to ever happen at the Springdale Twin happened in 1982 when the theater hosted the world premiere of the CBS miniseries The Blue and the Gray. It was filmed in Northwest Arkansas. Frank Broyles plays the doctor that pronounces Abraham Lincoln dead. I myself stood on the lawn of Old Main and watched Gregory Peck as Abraham Lincoln. It was pretty amazing. But to get the world premiere, this is in the days of Lee Zachary running the Springdale Chamber of Commerce, so you know he could make things happen, and he brought this world premiere to Springdale to the Twin Cinema. At the theater itself, you have reenactors that fired off the gun salute, and you have all the public lined up. But before the showing, the premiere, they had a reception for all the beautiful people at the Rodeo Community Center. And the stars that came, look, there's Stacy Keach. There's, what's his name? That's John Hammond, who was one of the big stars, and Brian Kerwin. So they came to the premiere here in Springdale, Arkansas. Then at the theater, they all went from the rodeo grounds to the theater, flanked by soldiers and by the fans, and there's Stacy Keach and his wife entering the Springdale Twin to view the first episode of The Blue and the Gray. Now that would be a great place to end right there with movie stars coming to Springdale, but that's not what I wanted to end with. I wanted to go back to this time, the glory days, what I consider the glory days of Springdale movie theaters. And I wanted to end with this remarkable story of this Apollo statue. This has been such a wild ride for me to chase this Apollo statue. I've been captivated by Apollo like no other man has ever captivated me. I wanted to know what happened to him. Where's Apollo? I kept hearing about this statue. Where is he? So I do what all modern researchers do. I post it on Facebook. On our Springdale History Facebook page, where is Apollo? What did he look like? And James McNally, who is a lot of y'all know James McNally. He got right on Facebook and said, you need to talk to Sarah Agee. She is the granddaughter of William Sonneman. See, she's in Little Rock. She works for the governor. James said, just call the governor's office. Well, I found her email, so I email her. She emails right back and says, oh, yeah, sure, I remember the statue. And she said, I think it ended up in the home of this lawyer in Fayetteville named Richard Womack. That's where I remember it. So I had that little tip. Then just dumb luck, I found a 1948 article in the Northwest Arkansas Times about Dallas Barak just coming back from a Chicago estate auction at the Goldblatt Mansion, and that he mentioned he had bought this statue of Apollo. So there's a little clue. So then Marie Demarocas, our photo archivist, is a Chicago native. She said, well, that mansion, it was something. You need to contact the Chicago History Museum and see if they don't have photos of the interior. Well, they didn't have anything. Somehow I came to find the Wilmette Historical Society, which is where this Goldblatt Mansion is, not in Chicago. It's Wilmette is in north side along the shore. So the curator there sent me photos of the mansion's interior. He had photos of this mansion back in the day. So now that's not the mansion. That is a Baha'i temple that was being constructed. This is the mansion right here. It's on the shores of Lake Michigan. It was built by Benjamin Marshall. He was an architect and developer in Chicago. He built this mansion in the 20s. He was like Jay Gatsby. Just imagine the Great Gatsby. This was it. The focal point of the mansion was an indoor garden, a tropical garden that was 3 stories tall, plantings surrounded by a turquoise blue pool, glass walls that could be rolled back in the summer, exposing the garden to Lake Michigan. There was a solarium decorated in red and gold fabric with Egyptian furnishings. There was a dining room table that could be lowered. The floor could be lowered down to the kitchen below, where the table could be set, and then the table brought back up. Marshall entertained lavishly. He entertained everyone from the Duke of Windsor to Ethel Barrymore. So I'm telling you, our Apollo saw Ethel Barrymore and the Duke of Windsor. Marshall sold the mansion in 1936 to Nathan Goldblatt, who was a Chicago department store magnate. Goldblatt died in 1944. His wife put the mansion and its furnishings up for auction in 1948. Enter Dallas Barak from Springdale, who sends his picker up there. He didn't actually go, I don't think. He bought a truckload of antiques at this estate auction, brought it back to Springdale. So now let's go to this interior photo that Patrick Leary from the Goldblatt Museum. Looky there. Now I see this is the first glimpse I have of what I think is Apollo. This picture that dates back, who knows when, 1920s maybe, 30s. And there's a close-up of him. So, oh my goodness, is that our Apollo? I don't know. That could be him. I think that's him. Marie thought it was him. Carolyn thought it was him. But where is he now? We still don't know. So at the same time, I'm corresponding with the Wilmette History Museum. I'm trying to find Fayetteville attorney Richard Womack, because that is the smoking gun. Sonneman's granddaughter says, that's the last place I saw the statue. Well, Richard Womack is no longer in the Fayetteville phone book. I don't know where he is. I do what any good researcher does. I Google Richard Womack. Lo and behold, Richard Womack, thank goodness, has a son named Richard Womack II, who's an attorney in Nashville, Tennessee. I thought, this has to be the same guy. So it has to be the same family. So I email him and say, are you the son of, and here's what I'm trying to find out. And he emailed me right back and said, oh, yeah, I know about that statue. We didn't call it Apollo. We called it David. And at that point, Ellen, Richard Womack says, oh, yeah, I remember that statue. I went to get it for my dad. I think we went up to Bentonville to get it. And I thought at that time, up until an hour ago, I thought, no, Richard Womack II is mistaken. He did not go to Bentonville. He went to Springdale. No. Ellen Compton has just shed new light on another of Apollo's journeys. Apollo stood on the porch of a home in Bentonville for a time, the home of the Hitts, who ran the Apollo Theater. When the theater closed down, the Hitt family took the Apollo statue to Bentonville with them. So Richard Womack was right. He did go to Bentonville to get that statue. He got it for his dad because Mr. Hitt was the theater manager who was, along with the projectionist, a man named Boyd Strickland, they were the ones that were arrested for showing that X-rated film. They pled guilty, paid a fine. Richard Womack II says they couldn't pay their legal fees, so my dad said, go up there and get that statue. So he did. And again, but he said, Apollo, we always called it David. Now here's another photo, what I think is probably a later time, because I think this may be getting close to the auction time because things are kind of in disarray. But there again, you see, there's Apollo on the stairway. So, and there he is, another view. So I said to Richard Womack II, where's the statue? He said, oh, it's right here in my office. I said, could you please take a picture of it for me and send it to me? He did. To compare, there it is at the Goldblatt Mansion. Now you'll notice that Apollo has seen some hard times. His arm is broken off. His finger is broken right there. And I had somebody on Facebook say, oh, yeah, we used to stick cigarettes up in his fingers. And that it got so bad that he had nicotine stains on his. It's an amazing piece of sculpture. And here's another view. Now, I'll stay on that, and I don't want to offend anybody's sensibilities. But when I saw that, I thought, my goodness, people let that be displayed in Springdale? Another fellow told me, well, there was a time when they first put him out there, when the theater first opened, they covered him up with a cloak. They draped him But after people got used to it, they took the cloak off. So there he is. There he is in a Nashville lawyer's office. Apollo, and this is the picture I want to end with. The Apollo statue in the Apollo Theater came to mean to me, it just came to symbolize the history of Springdale movie theaters, from those first silent pictures at the Chautauqua Auditorium to the filming of the showing of Blue and the Gray at the Springdale Twin. And what a joy, what fun this research has been for me. And I wanted to leave you with a fun memory. This is probably a rodeo parade going past the Apollo Theater. Sometimes this research took me right down the path I expected. And lots of times, even just an hour ago, Ellen, it threw me for a loop. Sometimes the research made me laugh, and sometimes the research made me a little bit sad. But it was always, always entertaining. And it took a lot of help from a lot of people to bring this program to you today. Just like in the movies. Just like in the movies.
This podcast was produced by the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. We welcome your comments. You can email us at Shiloh, that's SHILOH, at springdalear.gov. If you'd like more information about our podcast series or about the museum in general, you can visit our website at www.shilohmuseum.org.